Pilates is having a huge moment right now, which means a lot of chatter on social media and some interesting takes, especially from the weightlifting community. As a certified Pilates instructor who has taught thousands of people in New York and online, I have some responses to get off my chest. So today we're going to address weightlifting versus Pilates. What's true, what's a myth, and what do you need to know to get your best workout? Now, before we get started, I just want to say I love weightlifting. I've done it for a good chunk of my adulthood. I think it goes together with Pilates like peanut butter and jelly. So my perspective is, if you love it, do it. Item number one, I hear this all the time, is that you cannot build muscle with Pilates. This one really bakes my biscuit. The two main criticisms are that there's no progressive overload, and the second is that you can't achieve muscle hypertrophy. Now, we're gonna have to get scientific for a minute on this one. This is where I'm gonna bring in my props. All right, it's time to get scientific. What is progressive overload and what is muscle hypertrophy? Progressive overload is the idea that you need to continually challenge muscles with more and more weight as you continue working so that you can appropriately challenge them. Muscle hypertrophy, on the other hand, is the idea that you need to continue challenging muscles to a greater and greater degree so that you can achieve muscle growth. There are a couple different versions of that. I'm going to keep it simple for the sake of this video and the sake of clarity and sanity. And there is a criticism that with Pilates, you cannot progressively load your muscles. You can't keep challenging them over time, which means you will not build muscle. And I have a real problem with that. First of all, I'm going to ditch the science stuff for the next part. First of all, the idea that you cannot continually load exercises in Pilates is just incorrect. Some Pilates uses only body weight and a mat. Some of it uses, like this beautiful bad boy behind me, this Pilates reformer. Some of it uses spring resistance, which is a form of, you guessed it, resistance training, as is body weight to a certain degree. That said, how do we progressively load work? There are a couple different ways we can do that. We can increase the spring weight if we're using a machine like the reformer or the Cadillac or some of the other Pilates equipment. And we can also change our level on the reformer, which increases the sense of resistance. We can shorten the ropes, we can do all sorts of things. The idea also that you cannot achieve hypertrophy in Pilates is really interesting because, number one, how do we know where people are starting from, right? The idea of challenging a muscle. If you are really strong and you're starting from a really optimized place of strength in all of your major muscle groups and all of your stabilizers, yeah, maybe the maximum spring load we can achieve here is not going to feel like a whole lot to you, or might not get you to the point of muscle growth. But most people who are seeking Pilates or want to add it into their routine could benefit from spring resistance or even body weight work on the mat. So the idea that you can't grow muscle with Pilates is really coming from a different perspective than many people who may be seeking to start a workout routine through Pilates. That said, there are some limitations of Pilates as a tool for muscle growth, and I'll talk through those now. First is there is a limit to the max resistance. So let's use a reformer as our frame of reference. There are only a certain number of springs. They all only have a certain amount of weight. As I mentioned, you can change your level, you can make the positions less stable to really amplify and increase the demand on the muscles, but there is a threshold. It's not a gym where we have dumbbells going up to, X number of pounds or kilograms. The other limitation is that the resistance is not continuous through the full range of motion. I don't hear people talking about this a lot, but when you stretch a spring on a reformer, and I'm going to actually move the carriage right now to show you, but when we move the machine and we stretch the spring out, you'll see it's actually expanding as I move the carriage and contracting as we come back. The resistance that is exerted at the beginning of that range of motion is very different than the resistance at the end range of motion. Specifically, the resistance is at its greatest when you stretch the spring the furthest out. So the downside of that is you're getting less resistance at the starting point than you are at the end point. However, there's always a however. Oftentimes that means you are getting a ton of strength and stabilization building at the very end range of your mobility, which can be super productive for people with joint hypermobility, yours truly, and can create a really stabilizing effect in a very controlled manner. So how do we wrap this all up? Number one, can you build muscle with Pilates? For a lot of us, yes. If you're very strong already, you might want to seek out a spring-based resistance form like Reformer. I have tons of videos on my channel and in my channel membership, but you should check it out. And I would say the vast majority of the population can achieve muscle growth with it, but based on your current fitness level, your miles may vary. The next one up is one that I hear a lot about, but is completely wrong. Number two, it's just rehab. I hear this all the time. And there was this video floating around from Sebastian Legree, I think is his name. If you have heard of Megaformers or you've seen a version of Reformer where it's got like the big handles and stuff, it's a very like athletic interpretation of Pilates, you could say. In it, he talks about how his Legree method is far superior to Pilates because Pilates is only used as rehabilitation. It is very based on all lying down and very stable, and it's meant to be very gentle, very gentle. And for context, he comes from a weightlifting gym fitness background. That was his original certification. It's really interesting because rehabilitation is a part of one of the use cases of Pilates, and I think a big part of why it's been popularized in the United States. But if you go back into reading any of the source material, like Your Health, Return to Life, or Caged Lion, which is a great book from a friend and former student of Joseph Pilates, talking about his perspective on the method and what it can do. And even from the outset, it was never intended to just be rehab. It was always intended to be a comprehensive system of exercise that people can use to be their strongest, most vital selves. And while there are tons of clinical Pilates instructors and physical therapists who use and prescribe Pilates to reduce pain and help people with their injuries, and I've seen it in the studio day in and day out in my private clients, it also can be used to help people live better, pain-free, more vital lives. It also can be applied in a really gymnastic, acrobatic way. In fact, my favorite apparatus is the Cadillac. Don't tell the Reformer, don't tell her I said that. But you can do all sorts of really acrobatic gymnastic stuff where you basically hang from the rafters. It can be a really athletic, empowering thing, even in the very classical work. So the idea that it's just rehabilitative is purely wrong. It is part of the application of Pilates, but it is not all you can do with it. It can be very challenging. I don't get it. So this next one I have some opposing thoughts on. It is no good for bone density. So bone density. Why is bone density important, and how do we improve it or protect it? Bone density is literally how dense your bones are inside your body. What does that do for you? If you fall, the more dense your bones are, the less likely you are to have a break or a catastrophic break. What does weightlifting do for bone density? So anytime you're putting stress or strain on your muscles, basically what you're doing is you're stimulating bone density. So really the idea is, from like a medical and weightlifting perspective, the heavier the better. And I think you can't argue with that, right? That's just science. But I think the idea is that Pilates is not resistance training, right? There's also a little bit of the idea of the most efficient is the only thing that you should do. And full disclosure, strength training with weights will be the most efficient thing that you can do for bone density, full stop. That said, Reformer, spring-based Pilates, or Pilates done on the mat, even with body weight, can be helpful for building and protecting bone density. How does that do that? Especially if you are working on a Reformer or another Pilates apparatus with springs. The springs are resistance. Resistance is going to help you with your bone density. Will it have the limitless range of benefit that something like weight training will? Absolutely not, of course. As we mentioned before, there's a ceiling on how much resistance we can have here, but it still can have a measurable protective impact. And again, I think strength training and Pilates go together like peanut butter and jelly, a little grilled cheese and tomato soup, but it doesn't mean that there's not value here. And it doesn't mean that you also can't have a benefit of doing body weight work even without the springs. So can you increase and protect bone density with Pilates? Yes. Will you be able to protect it and build it even more so with weight training? Probably. Again, it all depends on where you are starting from and what level of support you need. But I encourage doing both for bone density if you can. Now, this last one is pure misogyny. It's just for women. First of all, Joseph Pilates was a man. He was a manly man. He trained women and men. The lore goes that he invented Pilates for men in an internment camp, but he was a boxer, he was a fighter, He was allegedly a circus performer. He was a fitness dude through and through. And he strongly believed and practiced that contrology, his original method, which now known as Pilates, was for everybody. And with the way the culture is now, especially with a lot of the social media pink Pilates princess stuff, it doesn't necessarily lend itself to the perspective that Pilates can be a very masculine activity too. But really, it's strenuous physical activity with a ton of stabilization challenge and a bunch of resistance work. So it was not created just for women. And full disclosure, a lot of the perpetuation of Pilates after the death of Joe Pilates was through dancers in the dance community in New York. And there's something to be said for dance being also seen as a very feminine, not masculine activity. In short, Pilates was created for everybody. Joseph Pilates died rallying for it to be used as a tool to improve everyone's health, certainly not just women, and ultimately who couldn't benefit from better core strength, better mobility, better strength in your end ranges of motion. So is it just for women? Absolutely not. If you're a man who's interested in Pilates, go find a studio that feels welcoming to all. It really can benefit everybody. And that's why you see football players, professional athletes of all types and genders. It can be a super effective form of cross-training as well as a primary form of exercise. What's your perspective? Comment down in the comments below. If you're curious about hearing about more Pilates myths, I will link a video down here. And as always, check out my channel membership if you want to learn more about Reformer and how you can challenge your body to increase your strength, mobility, and more. Bye.